At 7:42 a.m., on August 17, 1943, Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning on the pierced steel planking of WWII Airfield, New Guinea. The metal above his head was already warm. The tropical sun had burned through the morning haze, and the air smelled of aviation fuel, oil, and wet earth, the smell of airplanes about to go to war. McKenna wasn't watching the pilot climb into the cockpit. He was watching the airplane. The Lightning's twin engines were turning over, coughing once, then settling into a deep, uneven rumble that vibrated through the wing and into McKenna's chest. The sound told him everything was technically fine. Oil pressure good, RPM steady, nothing an inspector would write up. And yet, McKenna felt the familiar knot tighten in his stomach. The pilot was Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 23 years old, farm kid from Iowa, 6 combat missions, 0 kills, not because he was reckless or incompetent, because he did exactly what he'd been taught. Hayes had followed the doctrine, and the doctrine was getting men killed. Out over the Huon Gulf, Japanese radar stations had already tracked the morning patrol lifting off. 18 Mitsubishi A6M0s were climbing to meet them, veteran pilots, men who had been fighting since before Guadalcanal, men who knew exactly how a P-38 behaved once it slowed down. The manual said the Lightning should never turn with a 0, never use altitude, use speed, dive, fire, climb away, hit and run. On paper, it was flawless. In the sky over New Guinea, it was a death sentence. The Zeros didn't chase the P-38s in straight lines. They baited them, forced reversals, dragged them down into low-speed fights where timing mattered more than horsepower. And when the Lightning tried to roll out and escape, it was always just a fraction of a second too late. McKenna had watched 37P. The first time McKenna noticed the pattern, he told himself it was coincidence. Combat always looked chaotic from the ground. Pilots made mistakes, weather shifted. Enemy pilots got lucky. That's what the after-action report said, and that's what everyone wanted to believe. But by mid-July of 1943, the same words were coming back over the radios. Again and again. Controls feel slow. She's not rolling fast enough. I can't get her out of the turn. On July 9th, Lieutenant David Chen lifted off from WWII at 0615 on a fighter sweep toward the coast. He'd been in theater barely 3 weeks. Quiet kid from Sacramento. He talked cars with McKenna during pre-flight, flatheads, carburetors, California summers that felt like a different planet now. Chen came back 2 hours later with 3 bullet holes punched clean through his left boom. They were close together. Too close. That told McKenna something immediately. The Zero pilot hadn't sprayed. He'd led Chen perfectly. Knew exactly where the Lightning would be a moment later. That kind of shooting only happened when you understood your opponent's timing down to the second. Chen said the Zero had cut inside his turn. Said he tried to roll out and dive the way the manual taught, but the airplane felt like it hesitated, like it took a breath before obeying. Chen didn't fly again that week. 3 weeks later, McKenna heard he'd been killed over Rabaul, flying a different P-38. Same cause. Same language in the report. Pilot failed to disengage during defensive maneuvering. The second death hit harder. Captain William Morrison wasn't new. 11 confirmed kills. Flight leader. The kind of pilot instructors used as an example. If Morrison died, it wasn't because he forgot his training. On August 3rd, Morrison's flight intercepted 8 Zeros at 12,000 feet over Oro Bay. He got one on the first pass. Textbook. Clean. Then 2. Aircraft didn't lie. Pilots could misremember. Reports could be sanitized. But metal told the truth, if you knew how to listen. James McKenna had grown up fixing engines long before the Army taught him how to wear a uniform. He'd learned early that machines rarely failed loudly. They failed quietly, gradually, in ways that were easy to dismiss until the consequences stacked up. So when pilots kept coming back describing the same hesitation, McKenna stopped listening to the stories and started listening to the airplanes. The P-38 Lightning's aileron system wasn't complicated, but it was long. From the pilot's control stick, steel cables ran aft through the cockpit floor, disappeared into the twin booms. passed through a maze of pulleys near the tail, then ran forward again to the ailerons in the wings. Every pulley, every junction, every clevis pin was another place where tolerance could hide. The maintenance manual allowed a small amount of free play in the system, within specification. On paper, it was negligible. In the air, it was fatal. McKenna discovered it the way mechanics always do, by feel. During a routine inspection, he grabbed an exposed section of aileron cable and pulled. There was a moment, just a moment, where nothing happened. The cable moved, but the control surface didn't. Then the tension caught. He measured it later. About 3/8 of an inch at full deflection. Not much, but McKenna understood what that meant in a turning fight. At high speed, the slack was masked by airflow and inertia. The Lightning felt solid when diving at 400 miles an hour. But in a low-speed, high-G turn, exactly where zeros forced the fight, that slack translated into delay. The pilot moved the stick. The cable took up slack. The pulleys shifted. Then, finally, the aileron moved. A fraction of a second. But a zero pilot only needed a fraction. Japanese fighter tactics. The maintenance hangar went quiet after 2,300 hours. Most of the crew drifted back toward their tents, boots dragging, shoulders slumped from heat and exhaustion. Outside, generators hummed and insects battered themselves senseless against the overhead lights. Somewhere beyond the jungle, Japanese aircraft engines droned, night raiders maybe, or just distant patrols. Either way, it made the air feel tighter. McKenna stayed. He waited until the footsteps were gone, and the hangar belonged only to shadows and metal. Hayes's P-38 sat where it had been left after the evening checks, twin booms looming like dark pillars. The aircraft looked unchanged, perfectly ordinary. That was the problem. McKenna climbed a short ladder and removed the inspection panel on the left boom, the screws turning easily under his fingers. The aluminum was still warm from the day's sun. Inside, the control cable ran aft toward the tail, disappearing into darkness through a line of pulleys. He grabbed the cable with both hands and pulled. There it was, that same dead movement, that same tiny, unforgivable delay before tension caught. McKenna exhaled slowly. The wire came from a wreck. 2 weeks earlier, a P-38 had ground-looped on landing and been written off as scrap. McKenna had stripped what he could before it went to the depot. Standard practice in the Pacific. Bolts, fittings, anything useful, including a short length of high-tensile piano wire from the rudder trim system. He hadn't known why he kept it. He just knew it was good steel. Now he sat on the hangar floor with that wire and a pair of pliers, knees drawn up, flashlight clamped under one arm. The wire fought him as he bent it, spring steel pushing back, refusing to give cleanly. He adjusted the angle, bent again, trying to form a crude Z shape. His hands slipped. The wire bit into his thumb, sharp and unforgiving. Blood welled immediate, lie, dark against the steel. McKenna swore under his breath, wiped his hand on his coveralls, and kept working. 8 minutes. That was all it took to shape the piece. 8 minutes to make something that violated every regulation he'd ever signed his name under. Installing it was worse. The space inside the boom was tight. He worked mostly by feel. One arm wedged awkwardly against structural members, shoulder scraping metal edges. Sweat ran down his back despite the night air. The flashlight beam bounced as his grip shifted, throwing moving shadows across the cable run. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction. The clevis pin slipped from his fingers and vanished into the darkness of the boom. McKenna froze. For a long moment, all he could hear was his own breathing. If he couldn't find that pin, the job stopped here. He'd have to reassemble everything exactly as it was and pretend none of this had happened. He spent 5 minutes feeling blindly along the interior skin, fingertips searching until they brushed cold metal. There. He retrieved the pin, swallowed, and went back to work. The piano wire tensioner went in between the cable end and the pulley. It wasn't pretty. It didn't look like something Lockheed would ever draw. But when he forced the clevis pin through and seated it, the effect was immediate. McKenna pulled on the cable again. No slack. None. The control surface moved the instant the cable did. Clean, direct, honest. He tested it twice more just to be sure. Same result. McKenna closed his eyes for a second. If this failed in flight, if the wire snapped, if the tension was wrong, if it bound under load, Hayes wouldn't have time to recover. The airplane would roll when it shouldn't, or not at all. And McKenna would live the rest of his life knowing he caused it. He replaced the inspection panel, tightened the screws, cleaned his tools. He wiped the B-elements, ood from his thumb, and smeared grease over the stain on the wire so it wouldn't stand out if someone glanced inside. At 11:15, he stepped out of the hangar. The tropical night was still, heavy. The sky was low and dark over the jungle. McKenna stood there for a moment, listening to distant engines and insects, knowing he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He hadn't asked permission. He hadn't written it down. He'd changed an airplane in a way that officially didn't exist. At dawn, Robert Hayes would fly it. And in the sky, fractions of a second would decide whether McKenna had saved a life or ended one. By morning, there would be no more theory, only proof. The engagement began at 08:14 hours. Hayes's flight of 4 P-38s was cruising at 13,000 feet over the Huon Gulf when the call came in. Enemy fighters, low and ahead. The morning sun was behind them, hanging just above the cloud layer, washing the water below in silver glare. Perfect conditions for a bounce. Hayes flew number 3, slightly stepped down and back. He saw them almost immediately. Zeros, single-engine silhouettes with long wings, loose formation, climbing lazily. They didn't know the Americans were above them yet. The element leader rolled first. 4 lightnings tipped over together and dove. Hayes pushed the nose down and felt the familiar surge as gravity and twin Allisons built speed. 300 miles per hour. 350. The airframe began to sing. The zero he'd picked filled his gun sight. Green fuselage, red rising sun, the canopy glinting. He pressed the trigger. The P-38's nose barely moved as the 450 caliber machine guns and the 20mm cannon hammered forward. Tracers streaked out. Most missed. A few sparked along the Zero's wing. Not enough. The Zero snap-rolled right and pitched down, exactly the way Hayes had seen dozens of times before. It was the move that usually ended his attack, the moment when the lightning lagged just long enough for the enemy to slip away, or worse, reverse on him. Hayes rolled to follow. And for the first time since he'd arrived in New Guinea, the airplane did exactly what he told it to do. No hesitation, no mush. The stick moved and the lightning answered immediately. Clean, sharp, almost startling. The roll rate felt faster, but more than that, it felt connected, as if the airplane had been waiting for him. Hayes rolled 90 degrees in what felt like half the usual time, pulled the nose down, and suddenly the Zero was still there, still in the picture. He fired again. This burst walked up the Zero's fuselage. Engine cowling erupted in flame. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell away trailing thick black smoke, disappearing toward the jungle below. Hayes didn't cheer. He barely had time to register it. His wingman's voice cut in sharp and urgent. 3 Zeros diving. 12 o'clock high. Hayes looked up. They were already coming down, shallow dive, fast. They'd seen him shoot down their wingman. They had altitude and speed. Every instinct drilled into him screamed to run. Push the throttles, dive away, extend. Doctrine said escape. Reality said he wouldn't make it. The Zeros were too close. Hayes shoved the throttles forward anyway, started a climb. The distance closed faster than he liked. He could almost feel the moment coming, the one where the Lightning usually lost the race. So he did the thing the manual warned against. He reversed, hard left, full stick, pull. The Lightning snapped around, not sluggish, not heavy. It bit. The lead Zero overshot, caught mid-turn, suddenly exposed. Hayes pulled lead, fired a short burst. The Zero's left wing root shattered. The wing folded. The aircraft spun away. 2 kills. 30 seconds. The other 2 Zeros tried to scissor him, alternating turns, forcing overshoots, trying to exploit the old Lightning delay that had saved them so many times before. But the delay was gone. Every time they reversed, Hayes stayed with them. The airplane didn't fight him. It didn't argue. It responded. 1 Zero bled too much speed trying to force the turn. Hayes slid inside his radius, closed to 200 feet, and fired. At that range, he couldn't miss. The Zero came apart in pieces that rattled against Hayes's canopy, and right boom. 3 kills. The 4th Zero broke off and ran. Hayes didn't chase. His ammunition was low. Fuel gauges were creeping down. He climbed back to altitude, heart hammering, hands shaking inside his gloves. The entire fight had lasted 7 minutes. At 09:03, Hayes touched down at WWII. McKenna was waiting on the flight line. The engines wound down. The props slowed. Hayes climbed out of the cockpit, legs unsteady, flight suit dark with sweat. He walked straight to McKenna and stopped inches away. For a moment, he couldn't find the words. Then he said 2. It worked. What neither of them realized yet was that 6 other pilots had watched the fight from above, and they knew something was different about that P-38, because Lightnings weren't supposed to move like that. And whatever had changed inside Hayes's aircraft was about to change everything else. Captain Frank Mitchell watched the fight from 15,000 feet. He wasn't close enough to see tracers hit or metal tear away, but he didn't need to. Mitchell had flown the P-38 in combat long enough to know its habits. He knew how fast it rolled. He knew how long a reversal took. And what he was watching below didn't match his mental clock. Hayes's Lightning snapped into turns too cleanly, too decisively. When the Zeros reversed, the P-38 reversed with them. Not late, not sloppy, but right on time. Mitchell leaned forward in his seat, eyes narrowed. That wasn't just good flying. That was a different airplane. After landing, Mitchell didn't go to the officer's tent first. He went straight to the debriefing room. Hayes was still riding adrenaline, hands shaking as he filled out the combat report. 3 confirmed kills in a single engagement. Mitchell stood over him and asked a simple question. What changed? Hayes hesitated. He didn't know how to answer it. He said the airplane just felt sharper, more responsive, like it finally did what he asked. Mitchell nodded once. Who worked on it? That question led him to the maintenance area. McKenna was elbow deep in another Lightning when Mitchell found him. Coveralls stained black with grease. Mitchell didn't waste time. What did you do to Hayes's aircraft? McKenna looked at him for a long moment. Then he told him everything. The slack, the delay, the piano wire, the illegal modification buried inside the boom. When he finished, Mitchell didn't lecture him. He asked another question. Can you do it to mine? McKenna warned him. No approval, no testing. If it failed, careers would end. or worse. Mitchell didn't flinch. "I've lost 4 pilots this month," he said. "All good men, all caught in turns they couldn't escape. If this gives us a chance, I'll take the risk." That night, McKenna modified Mitchell's P-38. Mitchell flew it the next morning and came back grinning like a man who'd been given his favorite tool back. He told his wingman. The wingman told his crew chief. And the fix began to spread, not through orders, but through whispers. Cut the wire. Bend it into a Z. Install it in line. 8 minutes. Changes everything. Some crew chiefs refused outright. Said it wasn't worth the risk. Others had watched too many funerals. They did it anyway. By August 20th, 9 P-38s at WWII carried the modification. By early September, dozens more across New Guinea did too, installed quietly, removed for inspections, reinstalled afterward. No paperwork, no signatures, just men choosing survival over regulation. The results were impossible to ignore. Pilots who'd gone weeks without a kill started coming back with victories. Aircraft that should have been lost limped home instead. The Lightning's reputation began to shift, not on paper, but in the air. And then the Japanese noticed. Combat reports from the 11th Air Fleet started mentioning something new. P-38s were rolling faster into turns, reversing direction more quickly. Tactics that had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. One of the pilots who felt it firsthand was Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most experienced aces. On September 3, 1943, Sakai tried his standard maneuver. Bait the Lightning into a turn, wait for the delayed roll, then snap back inside. The P-38 rolled with him. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American got guns on him. Sakai had to dive away, shaken, confused. The aircraft looked the same, but its timing was wrong. Japanese intelligence examined wreckage from downed Lightnings and found nothing obvious. Engines were unchanged. Armament unchanged. No new equipment. What they couldn't see was hidden deep inside the booms, a 6-inch piece of wire that erased the delay their tactics depended on. By mid-September, the kill ratios flipped. For the first time in the Pacific, P-38s were trading kills evenly with zeros, and then better than evenly. Japanese command quietly warned pilots to avoid engaging Lightnings unless they had numerical advantage. The hunter was becoming the hunted. And all of it traced back to a modification that officially did not exist. Eventually, someone in the chain of command was going to notice. And when they did, the question wouldn't be whether the fix worked. It would be whether the men who'd broken the rules to save lives would be punished or quietly erased from the record. That reckoning was coming. The reckoning arrived quietly. In October 1943, a maintenance inspector at WWII noticed something he couldn't quite explain. Cable tension readings on several P-38s were inconsistent, still technically acceptable, but different enough to raise an eyebrow. He dug deeper, opened panels, followed the runs. Eventually he found the wire. A short, crude tensioner that wasn't in any manual. The report went up the chain. And then it stalled. For weeks, officers debated what to do. The modification was unauthorized. It violated regulations, but the numbers were undeniable. Squadrons flying modified Lightnings were losing fewer pilots and killing more enemy aircraft. The fix wasn't theoretical. It was written in combat reports and empty bunks that stayed empty less often. By November, Lockheed engineers arrived in New Guinea. They measured the tension, calculated the stress loads, flew test sorties, ran the numbers the field mechanics already knew in their bones. The conclusion was blunt. The modification was safe, it was effective, and it should have been there from the start. Lockheed quietly incorporated an improved tensioning system into later P-38J production models. The manuals were updated. The Lightning's handling improved across the board. The paperwork credited engineering analysis. It did not credit Technical Sergeant James McKenna. There was no commendation, no medal, no official acknowledgement. McKenna stayed in the Army Air Forces until 1946, then went home to Long Beach, California. He opened a small garage, fixed engines, raised a family. When people asked about the war, he said he was a mechanic, fixed airplanes. That was all. Lieutenant Robert Hayes survived. He flew 63 combat missions, scored 11 confirmed kills, and returned to Iowa in 1945. He married his high school sweetheart, worked as a crop duster, and lived a long, quiet life. Every year, on August 17th, he called McKenna to say thank you. Captain Frank Mitchell survived too. He rose to squadron command, retired as a colonel, and spent his career reminding young officers of something the manuals rarely taught. Listen to your NCOs. They see things you don't. In 1991, a military historian stumbled across scattered references to a field-installed cable tensioner in Pacific maintenance logs. He tracked McKenna down, then in his 70s, still working part-time in his garage. McKenna confirmed the story without drama. Said it wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. The historian later estimated that the modification may have saved 80 to 100 American pilots' lives. McKenna said he never counted. He remembered the ones who came back. James McKenna died in 2006, age 88. His obituary mentioned his service as an aircraft mechanic. It did not mention the wire. It did not mention that he changed how American fighters flew. That's how innovation really happens in war. Not in conference rooms, not in memos, but in dark hangars by men who understand machines and understand that sometimes following the rules is more dangerous than breaking them. If this story mattered to you, take a moment to like this video. It helps keep these forgotten histories alive. Subscribe if you want more stories about the mechanics, crew chiefs, and NCOs who rarely make it into the headlines, but without whom the war would have been lost. And if someone in your family kept planes flying, tanks running, or radios alive under fire, tell us about them in the comments. They deserve to be remembered.